Well, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. We are in the month of May 2020, and our theme this month is films of the actor Billy Crystal, the comedian Billy Crystal. So we started with the 1991 City Slickers, which features Jack Palance, who wins an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role in this film. Which is kind of interesting. He's not in the film as long as you'd expect.
No, I did a rough calculation. I would estimate he's in around a third of the film.
Yeah. Billy Crystal, in his autobiography, writes a lot about how this came to be and kind of his interactions with Jack Palance. This film and the subsequent City Slickers 2 takes up quite a bit of time in his autobiography. It's pretty interesting. If you are interested in checking it out, I definitely would recommend it. I listened to it on an audiobook that I checked out from the library. But I was listening to it at work, and I repeatedly would laugh out loud because the autobiography is that funny. But there's a number of scenes in this film. I mean, I guess first let's dive into what were your first impressions of this film?
Well, my guesstimation is this is the second or third time I've seen it this century. The first time I saw it was, I think, in 1992. I want to say it was an HBO preview or something like that. We had the basic cable, and we had a preview. And I remember watching it. And I guess I must have been around 12 when I saw it. And it's not like I hadn't seen movies before that were geared to a little older audience than me. This is a family-friendly movie for the most part.
Yeah.
But I just really absolutely adored this movie when I first saw it. It was just something fresh. It's a comedy, but it's also more than a comedy. It's got some wonderful character arcs. It's got some depth to it.
Yeah.
So it's a comedy plus.
Yeah.
I really liked it. I've always been quite fond of this film. I own it on DVD. It's back at the home place in Boise.
Yeah.
But it's just nice to revisit it. It's probably been the better part of 10 years since I've last seen it. And it's just a really enjoyable film. And it's a film I'd love to show my niece and nephews at some point.
Yeah, that would definitely be a fun one. That's, like you said, you could do this for a family night for, just about anybody. I've seen this film more recently than you have, but I don't remember exactly when. I want to say I've seen it probably in the last 5 or 6 years once, but not with any regularity. I bought it for tonight, and I'm actually glad I did, because this is a film that would be easy to revisit.
Yeah, it's very watchable. It's one that can bear a lot of rewatching.
Yeah. There's a lot of little tidbits in this film, a lot of kind of fun stuff as you go along.
Should probably discuss the basics about what the film's about.
Yeah. The film opens up with Billy Crystal, whose character's name is Mitch Robbins. It opens with Billy Crystal as Mitch Robbins, Daniel Stern as Phil Bergquist, and Bruno Kirby as Ed Ferrillo. And they are in Spain for the running of the bulls.
They're childhood friends.
Yep.
That have stayed quite close, and they have started a tradition of taking vacations together. And
to go on various adventures.
Spurred on mostly by Ed, who is owns a sporting good chain.
Yeah.
And is very much about keeping his youth. They have a comment early on about how he has increased. The older you get, the younger your girlfriends get.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of chasing youth, to paraphrase what Mitch's wife, Barbara, says. And they go to the running of the bulls in Spain for a fun opening
Whereupon
sequence.
Mitch gets gored.
Gets gored in the rear end.
Yeah.
Followed by an animated title sequence that I remember quite enjoying when I was younger.
Yeah.
And then we go back to New York, where they're from, and we see the doldrums in which Mitch finds himself in life.
Yep. And it progresses through the doldrums, and the doldrums are punctuated by
the 39th birthday.
The troubles that Phil experiences at Mitch's 39th birthday party. And then after that, Barbara tells Mitch that she wants him to accompany his friends on this trip to essentially a dude ranch.
Yeah,
to go drive some cattle.
So Phil and Ed have purchased tickets for all three of them to go on their vacation to this functioning cattle ranch in New Mexico and Colorado, and drive a herd up from New Mexico to the sister ranch in Colorado. they had previously planned, or Mitch had previously planned to go with his wife and 2 kids, one of which is played by his actual daughter,
Yep.
and one of which is played by a very young Jake Gyllenhaal.
Which is Jake Gyllenhaal's first film debut.
Oh, wow.
His original film debut.
And they're going to go down to Florida to visit her parents, and Mitch is not a big fan. And he's just become so frustrated that his wife Barbara, who is played by Patricia Wedig, insists that he go with them. He was going to try to bow out, but said, no, you need to go out there and you need to rediscover your smile.
Yep.
And before all this happens, they have a sequence earlier on his 39th birthday where he goes. First, his boss, played by Jeffrey Tambor, kind of demotes him because he works in a radio station selling advertising time, and he bought a lot of advertising time for a very annoying commercial, which they're getting pushback on. So he's like, you still do your job, but I have to prove every deal before you do it. And then he takes this news with him when he goes to career day at his son's class. And he gives a wonderful little depressing monologue about the trajectory of your life to these elementary school students. And it just feeds into where he is in his life and what prompts his wife to insist that he go out and try to find his smile. And then that gets us to the story proper. It's a fairly long introduction. There's almost a sub-movie there.
Well, they're doing some plot development. A lot of plot and character development. Ed and Phil.
Yeah,
they're doing some plot development for both of them so that they're ready when it comes along.
And Phil's has to do with a confrontation that happens at the birthday party.
Yeah, at Mitch's 39th birthday party, when one of his employees...
Phil is very whipped.
Phil is very whipped, and he is
works for his mother,
supermarket manager for his father-in-law.
Yeah.
And one of the cashiers shows up at Mitch's birthday party.
Played by young Yardley Smith of Lisa Simpson fame.
Yeah, and shows up and tells him that she's late for her period and that her pregnancy test has come back positive. And this leads to quite the confrontation between Phil and his wife, in which it becomes very clear they're getting a divorce.
It also turns out to be a false alarm. We later find out that...
we find out after they're at the ranch.
Is not actually pregnant.
But, so everyone has... Well, and then Ed, his wife wants to get pregnant. Ed's not sure he wants a child.
His 24-year-old underwear model wife.
Yeah. And so they're all out on this adventure to discover something about themselves. And they get to the ranch, and we are quickly introduced to...
a really nice supporting cast.
Yeah. We meet
we meet Ben and Jerry, or a version thereof, Barry and Ira Scholowitz, played by Josh Mustel and David Paymer.
We also meet Bonnie Rayburn, played by Helen Slater.
Helen Slater of Supergirl fame.
Yeah.
She was also in a movie called The Legend of Billie Jean, which if we ever do an 80s month, it's a very 80s movie.
Yeah. And then we meet Jeff and TR, played by Kyle Secor and Dean Hallow. And that's kind of the main characters, well, besides Curly.
And then you've got the Jessups, played by Bill Henderson and Phil Lewis, who are father and son dentists from Baltimore, who have gone to the ranch. And also, Helen Slater's character. And, that's... basically makes that up.
And then we're quickly introduced to Curly, who's played by Jack Palance, who is correcting some of the other employees as they're harassing Bonnie.
Yeah, the two main hands are handsy.
Yeah.
With Helen Slater, but Curly's there to keep them in line. You can't not talk about this performance. This
Jack
is what people
Palance.
remember. He won the Oscar. Jack Palance is a very interesting actor. I've got a story to share, which I think I actually shared on a previous recording, but I think I'll share it again just because I like the story, and a little background on Jack Palance. So Jack Palance is Ukrainian-American. He started out on the stage, worked his way into film. He had 2 Oscar nominations very early in his career, in the early 1950s, for a movie called Sudden Fear in 1952, and then for Shane in 1953. He, of course, is best known for Westerns, though he worked in a lot of genres. And he worked a lot in Europe when he couldn't get the kind of parts he wanted in the States. But the story that I like to share is about his first film role, which is in a movie called Panic in the Streets by Ilya Kazan. Billy Kazan is best known for pretty serious pictures that had to do with some kind of issue, race relations, anti-Semitism, things like that. But he made this really good film called Panic in the Streets, which is a thriller that came out in 1950, and it is about a case of the plague is brought onshore to New Orleans, and Richard Widmark is like a CDC guy, and he needs to try to shut down this plague, make sure it doesn't spread. And they find out early on that two people that have come in contact with this are two criminals. One is Jack Palance, one is Zero Mostel. And they think that they're being hunted down for the crimes they've committed. But Richard Widmark doesn't really care about that. He just wants to keep the plague from spreading. And there's a scene in which Jack Palance and Richard Widmark have a fight, and Jack Palance is supposed to hit Richard Widmark. He got too excited. It was too in the moment, and he really slugged Richard Widmark to the point that he rendered him unconscious. He was unconscious for a number of minutes. And the story is that Richard Widmark would always say, it's like, I work with a lot of actors, a lot of tough actors, difficult actors, but there's only one actor who I'm really scared of, and that's Jack Palance.
Yeah. Well, an interesting another note about Jack Palance, he apparently never watched his films. So Jack Palance never saw City Slickers until after he won the Oscar.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
he's probably like, oh, what did I do that was so good? I should study my own work.
Yeah, but his previous nomination as best, for an Oscar was 1953.
Yeah.
So
nearly 40 years.
Yeah, had passed 38 years between when he'd last been nominated and when he wins an Oscar.
And everybody, I think, was really happy that he won that. He deserved it. It was a perfect part for him. It's hard to imagine anybody else in that part.
Well, again, check out the Billy Crystal autobiography, because he gives a lot of story about how Jack Palance came to be in this role and kind of his interactions with Jack Palance, and it's really quite entertaining. Mm-hmm. So,
and then of course he famously did sit-ups on the Oscar stage when he received the award.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Well, and another thing that occurred when he won the award, when he received the award on stage, he made a comment to Billy Crystal, "I take bigger craps than you," which is a line that he delivers in the movie, and people forgot that was a line from the movie, and so they thought he was upset with Billy Crystal at the Oscar ceremonies. So, but yeah, but it's a line from the movie. But yeah, so we're introduced to Curly and the other characters, and pretty soon they head out on their adventure to drive the cattle, and of course everyone's terrified of Curly, not necessarily without reason. And there's some incidents that happen early on their expedition. Billy Crystal at one point spurs a stampede, so he and Curly go off on an adventure of their own.
You and me alone?
Yep. And it's funny because Curly makes the comment, he says, "I'll catch up with you later," and Billy Crystal's like, "Don't you mean we?" And because he's convinced Curly's going to kill him. But there's some funny things that happen on that little side adventure.
They end up really bonding. That's kind of the emotional heart of the movie.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, Curly actually passes away. So they're then being led by the other hands to continue the adventure until one night they all are getting drunk. Cookie has broken his legs, and the other two, TR and what was the other guy's name? TR and Jeff find the liquor and get drunk themselves, and an altercation ensues. They have to confront him, and they end up ditching the expedition and leave just these paid tourists to drive the cattle. And they're split as to what they're going to do, and it ends up just being our three protagonists.
Not at first, though. Because originally...
Phil originally ditches them, and it's just going to be Phil and Ed are just going to be the ones that are driving the cattle.
And Mitch was going to go with Helen Slater and the Ice Cream Twins.
But he comes back and joins them, and the three amigos are driving the cattle. And there's more further adventures as they're driving the cattle the rest of the way, but eventually they succeed in driving the cattle back to the ranch in Colorado. And they're offered a refund when the Jessup son, one of the dentists, suggests that they, instead of getting a refund, that they just get the chance to come back and drive the cattle again. And that's when the ranch owner informs them that he's selling all the cattle because cattle prices are just too high right now. Beef prices are too good. And so at one point, Mitch has delivered a calf on the journey, and the mother's been killed. So apparently, Mitch, adopts the calf, and he brings it.
Name a Norman
Yep, and brings Norman back to New York and takes him home with his family,
in
and
a minivan,
yep, and
and sets up unintentionally the sequel,
yeah,
which we will get to.
yep. But Ed finds his moment and what makes him happy, and Phil uh, makes a connection with Bonnie. And at the end of the film, we see Bonnie getting into a taxi with Phil to go home with him, and there's a connection there. But so the movie, of course, achieves its
Little catharsis. It's a wonderful little arc.
yeah, it resolves itself. The movie does a nice job resolving itself, and it's just a wonderful film. It's happy. It's got a good feeling throughout it. It's got just enough plot to keep you on the line, and enough plot to make everything plausible.
The pacing's really excellent.
Yeah.
There's not really a boring part of this movie.
Yeah,
It keeps a very consistent pace, and it's also not at all in a hurry,
yeah,
which allows it to work in some of the best parts of the movie, which are these conversations which they have on the trail. They have a conversation with the ice cream people about one of them
yeah.
claims that they can always determine the perfect ice cream to go with any meal.
yeah,
To which Mitch says, "Well, how do you know you're right?" It's like, we have 1,400 outlets. That's how we know we're right.
yeah,
Then they have a conversation, a theoretical conversation. If a beautiful woman came down
and your wife
from
was never going to
space, and
find
your wife was
out.
never going to find out, and you could enjoy sexy times with her, would you do it? And they have various answers to that depending on the character. And then the best day, worst day.
Well, but before we leave that, the best part is when Mitch proposes that question to Curly, and Curly's response is, "Well, is she a redhead?" So, yeah, and then best day, worst day. That was interesting too.
Best day, worst day is
It was
great.
entertaining, but then it ends on
Some
a
poignancy.
relatively serious, poignant note, and yeah,
These little digressions. I mean, this is a great vehicle for those kind of things, because this is a story that's not in a hurry. It's these things naturally fit. I mean, you're on a horse for
Yeah.
12 hours a day with your friends. You're gonna have conversations. You're gonna have to find some kind of verbal fodder to engage in, and then the three leads are just great
they
together.
work really well together. I found a thing actually. So Daniel Stern's character actually was originally cast. They originally cast Rick Moranis, but Rick Moranis had to back out because his wife had cancer or something like that. His wife fell ill, so Rick Moranis had to back out, and Daniel Stern was cast in that part.
It's hard to not think of Daniel Stern. It's a great part for Daniel Stern, who hasn't had a ton of great parts.
Yeah,
And in a way, off the top of my head, it's one of the most rounded parts
oh yeah.
that I've ever seen for Daniel Stern.
Well, and it would be hard to imagine Rick Moranis actually in this role.
Yeah,
But
it would have been too heavy, for lack of
Possibly.
a better term. It's like too much of a persona.
Rick Moranis is
That
too heavy-handed.
he would detract from Billy Crystal as the center of attention.
Yeah,
Which Daniel Stern does not do. Daniel Stern and Bruno Kirby both complement Billy Crystal very well. And you were mentioning earlier how Bruno Kirby has a working relationship.
yeah. I mean, they appear in several films together. I mean, off the top of my head, When Harry Met Sally is another one that they appear in. I think if I go and look, there's probably others, but I don't recall all of them off the top of my head. Of course, I think he's in City Slickers too.
I would think
But
so.
but yeah, they appeared in a number of films together. It didn't occur to me until this film started, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. But yeah, it's Billy Crystal. He actually helped write this film, though he's not credited as a writer in the credits for this. But there's some interesting tidbits about this. I mean, Billy Crystal really just enjoyed filming this film, and so he talks a lot about it. But they all were given lots of horse training because they clearly film a lot of this film on horses. But Billy Crystal enjoyed his horse so much that he actually bought the horse and owned it until its natural death. In the filming of this film, they also used 6 calves to play Norman. And actually, Billy Crystal actually birthed a calf for the film. So the part where the calf comes out and falls on him, that actually happened. But Billy Crystal adopted all 6 of the calves and paid for them to live out the rest of their life on a ranch in Colorado. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little tidbits. Oh, another one was in the opening of the film, Billy Crystal's Mitch's mother calls to tell and rehearses Mitch's birth story, and this becomes apparent that this is something that happens every year. Apparently, that's actually something that Billy Crystal's mother does. She calls him every year on his birthday and reenacts a rendition of his birth story. And the birth story used in this film is the story of when Billy Crystal was born. And also when they're out on the trail, Billy Crystal, and this leads to kind of another little interesting piece of trivia, but Billy Crystal, when they're doing best day, worst day, he talks about his best day was going to Yankee Stadium with his dad, which is a true story. And when he says that he still has the program to this day, Billy Crystal actually has the program from the first day that he ever went to Yankee Stadium with his father. And he talks about seeing Mickey Mantle. He actually got him to autograph the program the day that they went to the stadium. And then 20 years later, they were appearing on a TV program together. And he got him to autograph the program a second time. And Billy Crystal still has that program to this day.
Cool.
So he interjects things from his own life. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels personal.
Yeah.
There's definitely you really feel like you get a sense of the real Billy Crystal in it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's so wonderful in the deadpan stuff, and just some of the asides. I mean, it's very natural here, and which is he ever false? No.
Yeah, I don't know that he can really do that. And according to Billy Crystal, Charles Bronson was originally offered the role of Curly, but turned it down. But that's Billy Crystal revealed that in his autobiography that was released in 2013.
Turned it down.
Oh, Billy Crystal. Most people that are familiar with Billy Crystal, he's a notorious New York Yankees fan. So it's kind of intriguing that he was wearing a New York Mets hat in this film. And the reason that he wore a New York Cats film, if you actually watch the DVD commentary, he says he did this because the New York Mets had made a major contribution and helped out his annual comic relief charity. And so because of that, he wore a Mets hat in this film.
Indeed.
Or at least for a good chunk of the film. Yeah. So that's what led the Yankees fan to wear the Mets hat. And so, yeah, and Daniel Stern, so I mentioned they all were offered riding lessons and had some horse experience going into this. Daniel Stern, because his character's supposed to be so inept on the horse, declined any of the riding lessons and showed up for filming, and that was the first time he'd rode a horse.
Wow.
So, yeah. Lots of interesting little tidbits about the filming of this film. It sounds like the filming this film was as fun as watching this film.
So you said that it takes up an inordinate amount of space in the memoir.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes up a good chunk between City Slickers 1 and City Slickers 2. It takes up a good chunk of his autobiography. Yeah, it's pretty good though. And what other thoughts do you have before we move into budget and kind of some ratings?
No, I think I pretty much captured it.
So, do you know much about its budget or how much money this film made?
I know it was a success.
Yeah,
a big success.
Estimated budget of $27 million. Its domestic opening weekend was brought in $13 million, but its domestic gross was $124 million.
That's good for early '90s.
Yeah, so it grossed nearly $100 million. Worldwide gross, not quite as much as you might have thought, but for an early '90s film, not bad. Its worldwide gross was just over $179 million. So yeah, film made like $150 million.
Yeah.
You know, that's quite the success. Understandable why it would lead to a sequel.
Even though it's very much a film not built for a sequel.
Not originally, but yeah. Have we talked much about the sequel?
No, the plan is to get into that a little later in the month.
Yeah, we're gonna do it. We're gonna bookend the month and watch City Slickers 2,
which I've never seen.
Okay, so then I've forgotten that you did mention that. I'm interested to see what you're gonna make of City Slickers 2, because I think City Slickers 2, for a sequel, was actually pretty well done.
I come in suspicious.
Understandably, that's reasonable. So, what would you rate this film, and what would you expect this film to be rated?
In terms of online reviews,
IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes.
Well, this film is a perfect example of what I sometimes call the 4-star, 3-star film.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, it's a good film. It's the popcorn type of movie, enjoyable, low impact. It's not asking a ton of you, just executed about as well as you can imagine it being executed, but of a caliber, a storyline, of a scope that just does not warrant a 4 star.
Yeah.
So I would have to give it. I'd have to bridge the difference and probably give it 3.5 stars on the 4 star scale. But on the IMDb scale, I'm going to give it 9 out of 10.
Oh yeah.
I think it's pretty close to hits it out of the park.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on the 4 star scale. I'd say this is a very solid 3 star film, if not 3.5. On the 10 star scale, I was going to give it 8 stars. But yeah, surprisingly, its rating on IMDb is only 6.7 stars.
That's sad.
Yeah, I thought it would have had just a little bit better rating.
This is a film that most younger people are probably simply not familiar with.
You know, there's a scene we talked about this as it was playing live, but there's a scene in which apparently they have a 4-hour conversation about how to program a VCR, and Nate and I were sitting here laughing and we commented on how the current generation, that entire portion of that is just going to be way over everybody's head.
You got to set it to channel 3. It's going to make no sense to younger people, many of whom anymore find DVDs an antiquated novelty.
Yeah, yep. And then when they start talking about how to set the clock on the VCR, yeah, yep. That was quite a. It was a good line for the time. Probably the only part of this movie that doesn't age well. Everything else in this film really ages quite well.
Yeah, it has a timeless quality to it.
Yeah. So.
And we haven't talked, and I should just briefly mention how wonderful the score is.
Oh yeah.
It's got this the theme, which is very much homaging old school westerns, is just wonderful.
Yeah.
There's some supporting music, none of which really stands out, but the theme itself is great.
I was trying to look up the soundtrack. It kind of blends a few things.
It's
Young
got
at Heart, Birdland.
Yeah, it's got a
Tumbling
Tumbleweeds,
Rawhide, Bonanza, and Where Did My Heart Go, which was actually composed for this film. Mark Scheinman is the guy that does the score for this film, and he did quite well for it. So,
well, I think we've spoken to the extent that we have to speak right now on the original City Slickers, but we will return to these characters in the coming weeks and to Billy Crystal momentarily.
Yep.